The item he purchased was a Marine Corps K-bar knife, just like this one.
That was one of the things that jumps out at you right away with the Danny Rowling case is, just the general similarities with Ted Bundy's murders at Florida State up in Tallahassee.
The jury took about 6 hours over 2 days to reach its recommendations.
Those recommendations were unanimous and identical. Jurors deciding 12-0 that Danny Rowling should die in the electric chair.
Well, these are all serial killers, and what caused me to reach out to them is just the underlying fascination I have with people who do this and wanting to know why they do it. Getting back to the Idaho case, like, why did the guy do that?
All right, we're joined today by J.T. Hunter. Now, I've invited J.T. Hunter here because he is the author of the book, A Monster of All Time, The True Story of Danny Rowling, the Gainesville Ripper, as part of a series called The Monsters of True Crime. Now, I reached out to JT and grabbed his book because somebody in the comments was talking about my Bryan Kohberger coverage when I was interviewing Howard Bloom about his book. And they pointed out that Bryan Kohberger may in fact be a copycat. And people say, copycat of who? Oh, Elliot Rodger?
Tomorrow is the day of retribution.
Is this the latest face of evil in America?
You forced me to suffer all my life, and now I'll make you all suffer.
An angry and psychologically twisted young man whose public rantings exploded into sheer terror in a quiet California community.
Shots fired.
Elliot Rodger has come up in the case. He is an incel out of California who did some killings, but this one was even spookier. It's a very well-known serial killer in the time, which is 1990 through 92, executed in 2006 or so. But I feel like he slipped off the headlines a little bit with BTK and the other ones there. And that is Danny Rowling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper.
5 University of Florida students were murdered. It happened over the course of 3 days. And there are a few similarities between that case and the University of Idaho quadruple murders.
Now, I know you may not follow the Idaho 4 quite as much as you have the Gainesville, but I didn't know if you were familiar with the Bryan Kohberger case and what went on in Idaho.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it in general terms. I don't know a lot of the specifics about the case. I just know, the basic information that's been reported on the news.
Fair enough. Well, I guess the salient points are there's some similarities there. Like, biggest similarity of all, a K-bar knife. The very specific murder weapon. Bryan Kohberger was a criminology student and was actually learning under Kathleen Ramsland, who is a very famous author of true crime, serial killer stories. She interviewed and I think co-wrote a book with a BTK killer.
He seemed like eager to be in the classroom. He was polite. He was respectful, intense, and curious. And there was no reason for me to think that he was anything other than someone who was really interested in this potential career.
And there was also a fascination with Ted Bundy, Bryan Kohberger, I believe, had, which actually kind of ties to Gainesville as well, because in your book, I think you started off saying that everybody is going, geez, it's almost like Ted Bundy wasn't executed. What's going on here? Is this another Ted Bundy? What's happening?
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the things that jumps out at you right away with the Danny Rowling case is, just the general similarities with Ted Bundy's murders at Florida State up in Tallahassee in the panhandle of Florida. And then Danny Rowling murders in Gainesville at the University of Florida, more in the central part of the state.
And then now, 30 some odd years later, thereabouts, you have Bryan Kohberger, who is murdering in a college town, Moscow, which is right near the University of Idaho. He breaks into the house, I believe, through a sliding door. Danny Rowling also a sliding door, a blitz attack. Essentially, like very many stabs in the narrow area. Another curious peculiarity, it just came out after the sentencing or during the sentencing that Bryan Kohberger had some other object with him, and they were asking if it was a vacuum, which is kind of weird because part of the Danny Rowling case, I think you covered, is that he brought dish soap with him to kind of clean up after himself.
Then when he's through, he turns her over. And through him, you'll have evidence that all she could do was muffle her protests. He killed her by stabbing her in the back. Takes her body, drags it out the hall, cleans it off, and poses it. Now, I say cleans it off. We're going to provide you evidence both at scene 1 and at scene 3 that what he does is he takes dishwashing liquid that he finds at the apartment, and he cleans off the bodies and he douches them out with dishwashing detergent, because that gets rid of evidence.
Yeah, some of the murder sites he did clean up after himself, using, as you said, using dish soap on at least one occasion to clean out the victim, ostensibly to try to get rid of any sort of DNA sort of evidence. He also used, I think he used the laundry, the washing machine, at the house of one of his victims as well, for the same reasons.
Now, that brings up a good question because 1990 is pretty early in DNA investigations, wasn't it?
Yeah, that would have been well before a lot of the advancements that we have nowadays. And, of course, DNA's, it seems like every, 5-10 years, there's some sort of new approach to it, as the technology, of course, gets better and better. And, we're seeing, as I'm sure you're aware, we're seeing now, more and more of these cold cases that are getting solved through DNA, including, familial DNA, using the DNA of family members, like even way down the family tree, and being able to link that back to, to cold case crimes.
Or current crimes. Actually, tying it back to Kohberger again, Idaho 4, that was familial DNA that ultimately led to him. They had a trace DNA on the sheath. They broke protocol, went into the general public databases, and this is the first time they did it for a live case. So they were doing it for cold cases. That's how they caught the Golden State Killer. But with Kohberger, they thought, DNA is DNA. Maybe we could do it with a live case. And there is some controversy about that, but they did do it there.
Yeah, that raises a lot of interesting issues, I think, about how that's going to be received. Of course, he ended up pleading to it, the murder charges, right? So they don't have to actually try him.
He did cop a plea. He did cop a plea, but he did not allocute. And there are still people who think he's a patsy, which is sad. I feel like if he did a full allocution like BTK or somebody has said, I went here, I did this at this time, maybe that could have helped clear some of that up. It always sucks when there's a mystery, when he just says, yes, guilty. Guilty. I mean, at the extent of it. And then at the sentencing, do you want to have any comments? Respectfully, no. Or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's it. That's all the guy said. Just sat there, staring like a, cold fish looking at everybody.
I mean, the big question everyone wants to have answered is, why? Like, why did he do it? So, not having an actual trial with, him potentially testifying, I don't know, he probably wouldn't have, but, he could potentially explain himself there. But otherwise, people are going to be, like you said, with him just pleading to it like that without elaborating on it at all.
Right. So let's go and circle back because a lot of these, you have even more knowledge with Danny Rowling. Obviously, you've read hundreds of pages on his case all the way through, etc. So maybe we can explore him. I believe he actually did talk a bit more about why. He even didn't he co-write a book with Sandra London?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. And one of the things he had claimed, at least, I don't know if this was an after the fact sort of way of, trying to come up with an explanation or not, but what he ended up claiming after the fact was that he had some sort of supernatural sort of encounter when he was in prison, and he had been promised that if he would do these bad things, basically, that this sort of demonic sort of being would help him get revenge, essentially, for all the bad things that life had done to him over the years. So what he said is that there was some sort of pact he made that for each year he spent in prison, he would have a murder victim. And so he had spent 8 years in prison cumulatively. So he decided 8 victims. He would kill 8 people.
Really? Okay, but a couple things come to mind on that. First off, I think of David Berkowitz and Son of Sam and Barking Dogs. I'm like, okay, so is this is this a similar thing to that? But is that why he stopped? I thought that he stopped after 8 because he did those rapidly. I mean, the 5 killings in Gainesville they took place over what, 3 or 4 days,
Yeah, they were quick,
and,
right on top of each other. Yep.
which is odd for a serial killer because that's almost getting into spree territory. When they're I've always understood it as a spree killing as one sequence of killings that is continuing on. Serial killers generally are spaced out a little bit. I mean, at least a few days.
Hmm. Yeah. Although, that kind of brings to mind, actually, as you're talking about that, it kind of brings to mind Bundy a little bit. Because I know he had attacked the sorority house girls, and then I forget how many there were. I think there were like 4 or 5 in the one sorority house, and then he fled that scene, and then very shortly after that, he attacked a couple other girls in a just a regular, I think, townhouse or something nearby. So in that respect, it was, there's a little bit of similarity there, I guess, with Rowling. But yeah, normally you think of serial killers, they satisfy the whatever the desire is, whatever the urge is, and then they have their cooling off period, right? So they don't kill for a while until they can't not kill again. The urge becomes too great that they have to do it again. So yeah, usually there's this period of time in between, as you said.
Okay, so now, but with him, it's sounding to me like maybe he actually was stopping legitimately, or I mean, he got arrested from what I understand, what, 12 days after, or like a week and a half after the last killing with the unrelated robbery. Is that correct?
Yes, he was arrested in Ocala, Florida, as you said, from a bank robbery. He was pursued after the bank robbery and caught. Um, so yeah, it had been. I don't remember exactly how much time it had been, but I think about what you said sounds about right.
Now, the fact that he stopped and he was jailed because maybe he would have gone off again and done something, who knows, but didn't that cause confusion in the investigation? Because I think you spent some time on an Ed Montgomery.
Humphrey, I think.
Humphrey, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Ed,
Hmm.
Ed Humphrey.
Yeah, I mean, Ed Humphrey, he'd actually attended classes there in Gainesville. But he was kind of a strange guy. And he had some violent acts in his past. Nothing to the scale that Rowling ended up doing, but Humphrey was somebody that the authorities they're investigating the case initially, they really zeroed in on him. They thought he was the guy, just because of these different the background he had, and because of the strange behavior he had, and he had been sighted around the area, where the killings had occurred, these sorts of things. So he was zeroed in on pretty quickly, by the investigators initially. They thought they had their guy, and you know he went through a lot. I think because of that, as you might imagine, somebody that is wrongfully targeted as the perpetrator of a crime. The media gets a hold of that, and um, he had to deal with all that. But so yeah, so this was a guy they thought they had their guy, until they found out that Rowling was actually the person that did it.
Well, even after Rowling, weren't they still persisting on someone? They were trying to prove that he and Rowling somehow knew each other or were working together.
Um, yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't remember that aspect of it, of the story, but at some point they learned that Rowling was actually the guy. But they were after Humphrey for quite a while.
Okay, do you know whatever happened with Ed Humphrey?
Um, well, he got arrested in another county, another part of Florida, on a completely unrelated issue. It was more of a familial family violence kind of thing. So he was arrested over there. He did his time or pled out, whatever it was, and went on and tried to live as normal life as possible.
Okay, so let's go back. Can you tell us about Danny himself? Like just who he is, his background, what started all of this. And there is a weird coincidence there too, because Danny was in a car accident and Humphrey was also in a car accident, so I recall, which I thought was interesting while reading your book.
Oh, yeah, yeah. He did have that car accident. Yeah, Humphrey had a lot of mental issues, that he took medication for and things like that. And in fact, after he was arrested, he was sent to a mental health facility. That's where he served his time there. Um, but getting back to Danny Rowling, he came from a pretty rough background as far as his family environment went. His father, by all reports, his father was very abusive towards him, um, physically abusive, on multiple occasions, and mentally abusive as well. And the relationship with his father really had a lot to do with why Rowling ended up doing the things he did ultimately, I believe. He had this rage that had built up over the years, largely because of the things his father had done to him and subjected him to when he was younger, when he was growing up. And so he had this rage that built up, and he ended up directing that towards others to kind of take his revenge, so to speak. Um, and unfortunately, other people ended up paying for it. But his father, um, there's multiple instances of his father both beating him with different instruments, like belts and things like that, but hitting him, with his fists, things like that, and also just degrading him, purposely embarrassing him, things along those lines.
Was his
But
father a policeman?
yeah, he was a policeman in Louisiana. So he had a lot of friends in the police force, so he tended not to be held accountable for things he did a lot of the times.
I was wondering about that. Is that part of the reason? Because from your book, I believe he abused both Danny and Danny's mother.
Yes, yeah. And that's another thing that Danny was really resentful about was A, the fact that his father was abusing his mother, but also B, the fact that his mother was staying with his father, her abuser. So he had really these these feelings of both loving his parents, including his father, who was beating him, but also hating him at the same time. So he had these very ambivalent feelings towards his father, and um, I don't know what the background is with the Idaho, case. I don't know if there's something similar to that, and in his background there, but
Not that I don't know of any abuse in his background. The background of Bryan Kohberger is different and interesting, that he had a very severe addiction problem. I know that, all the way to he was a heroin addict at one point, and he was obese and wound up losing an extreme amount of weight, had like a plastic surgery that, like pulled all the skin back in, and things like that, went vegan. So he had, it was an odd thing. And he also had this condition that's called like blindness or snow blindness or something, like he would see static or something whenever he was looking out. Odd stuff. But I don't know of specifically abuse per se, but it was like a challenge. He the father had a tough time with him. He was in trouble, that kind of thing. But I don't know of any specific typical abuse pattern, which a lot of hardcore sociopathic types or whatever are almost created sometimes through abuse.
yeah, I mean that's one of the things that's often pointed to as one of the big factors that can lead to this, and I've seen it in several of the the stories I've covered. The serial killers involved in those, they've had that sort of background. So it's interesting to hear, because as I said, I'm not that familiar with what happened in the Idaho case and the background of things. So it's interesting to hear that about him over there. With especially the drug problem background and things like that.
That one actually, that was something that really stood out to me, because I'm not used to heroin being tied with a serial killer, in a background. But then Danny himself, now, you wrote in the book that he struggled and he had problems in school, I believe. But then didn't he almost get really religious for a little while, and was like trying to clean his life up, or go straight because he was in love with a girl or something? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, he did. He served in the military, in the Air Force, for a couple of years, and then was discharged. And shortly after that is when he, as you said, when he got involved with a church, um, got very involved with the church, and that's where he met a woman that he ended up marrying. And he was involved with that for a while, for a couple years. Um, but he ended up having problems with that marriage, and it only lasted, I think, 3 years or so, before his wife ended up leaving him, eventually.
They had
And
children too, right?
yeah, they did. They did. They had a daughter. And his wife ended up leaving him because of his behavior. He was, he would disappear for periods of time, and she got fed up with it and got tired of it. Understandably.
Now he had alcohol issues, right, or substance abuse problems at the time.
Yeah, he did. He was definitely a drinker. Alcohol was definitely a part of his MOs, is the way he operated. Um, and I think that's part of how he did what he did. Ultimately in Gainesville, alcohol was heavily involved in that. But I think that his wife leaving him, I think that was another one of the important events that happened to him that pushed him, so to speak, towards these violent acts he ended up committing.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss that with you because, I guess there's a little bit of overlaps or something, because there were signs that he could turn into something as a kid, because he was a peeping Tom as a teenager, right? And looking in peeking in windows, things like that, kind of scurrying about around houses.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
yeah, that's basically how his crimes really started. I think he had a neighbor, like his neighbor was a cheerleader, and that he kind of started watching her, in the bathroom, things like that, and then yeah, and he peeped at other houses as well, watched women, and so he kind of started out there, and then that escalated down the road eventually, into actual home invasions, rapes, things like that. And then, of course, ultimately the murders. So there was definitely this escalation with Rowling over time.
Now, when with the escalation, because reading the book, and by the way, the way you styled the book, I thought was really kind of cool because I like that obviously we know who did it; it's in the title, but you wrote it in a manner that this unknown or unsub that there's this guy and this is going on, and you're kind of just telling the perspective without saying his name. And it kind of lent it a little bit of mystery. So I like your stylistic choice of doing that. And then you'd have named characters that things would happen to until finally it came around and he was arrested. I believe in the after the Ocala or whatever robbery. I think that's when he finally identified, hey, this is Rowling, he's locked up, blah 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 blah. But do you think he had a chance to get out of it? Because it seems like he was going to church with the wife. His military career wasn't stellar, from what you wrote. It wasn't the worst. You didn't get dishonorably discharged, but it's kind of like hey, this isn't working out so well for you. Just kind of we'll separate ways. General discharge kind of stuff. You're a pain in the ass, soldier. Get whatever. And then he gets in the relationship. He breaks up with her. It seems like very soon after that, you described him just starting to rob places.
Yeah, again, it's that escalation. He went from the peeping, got into the rapes and the robberies. And I think the robbery. I mean, it was financial motivation, at least in part. He needed money,
Mhm.
but probably maybe he got a thrill out of it as well. Um, but yeah, he definitely started doing those, as you said, and he had difficulties. He had difficulties, maintaining jobs, keeping jobs, and that's really. I was gonna say that's actually kind of like a third major point, I think, of what set him off and what led him to, do the really bad things he did, was getting fired from a job. Um, he was fired for a job, in his mind, unjustly. And actually, I think it was that same day that he was fired is when he went and committed his first three murders, um,
Oh
in
wow. Okay,
Louisiana.
was that the job where he had cut his hand very badly?
It was a job in a restaurant. It was a Mexican restaurant, and
Oh,
he
okay.
didn't show up for a shift, or he's late for a shift, and he got fired because of that. And he felt like it was, he felt like it was unjust, termination. And I guess at this point, just probably still the divorce, his wife leaving him was probably still in his head, and of course, he's had these feelings and this rage towards his father this whole time, as well. So I think this is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. Um, and that very same day, as I said, he went and he killed a family. Um, you know, not too far away.
Horribly. Yeah, he killed him horribly. Now, before he killed the family, he had already committed sexual assaults prior to that, or no, or they
Um,
just rolled it.
yeah. So I'm trying to remember. I believe he had started committing prior to then. Because there had been some period of time had passed between when his wife left him and when this actually occurred. There was a number of years in between that time period. So I think he had started doing those prior to then. He definitely did after that. He tried to actually kill his father shortly after that. He He a woman in Sarasota, um, not too long after that, and then the Gainesville murders happened, you know, pretty much right on top of that. So
Okay, now in between all this, there's years potentially because he kept getting locked up. You documented him robbing places, and it seems like he would rob one, two, almost three, and get popped, and then he would escape from prison, go rob places, get caught again, be put in another prison. Can you describe some of his interesting career here with the robberies and being caught, etc.?
yeah, I mean, it's it's basically what you kind of how you described it. He just he would rob these places, and it's not like he's making huge sums of money off these robberies. He's mostly hitting convenience stores, gas station kind of places, that those sorts of things. So he's having these small robberies that he's committing, and he commits a few of them. He'll rob a grocery store, and then he'll get chased and caught, and he'll get sentenced to some prison time. He'll serve his time, get out, and eventually he's back at it again. Um,
Wasn't there an early one that he went to rob him and he's like, this is ridiculous and just keep it?
yeah, there was one. I'm trying to. I think it might have been it was either a grocery store or a gas station. I think a convenience store kind of place.
Interesting. Now, he escaped quite a. How many times did he wind up escaping? Was it 2 times or 3 times?
I know he walked off of like a chain gang sort of cleanup crew thing one time. And I don't remember exactly the circumstances of another time he might have escaped, but he definitely did escape at least the one time for sure. Possibly another time that I just can't recall off the top of my head right now, um, but yeah, and again, that's it's interesting. More similarities kind of pop up as we talk about Ted Bundy, because of course Bundy escaped from prison a
Oh,
couple
big time.
times. So um, the first time he was out for I think a week or so before he got caught.
Bundy's escape bordered on a Houdini escapade. The 5'11", 145-pound former law student ripped out a light fixture and steel grating in the ceiling and then maneuvered himself up through a 12-inch by 12-inch hole in the ceiling.
And then he, of course, ended up escaping again. So um, it's kind of another
Well,
sort of
Bundy had
similarity.
that really dramatic escape from the prison library,
Right. Yeah.
right?
He jumped out the
Or-
second
or-
story
or-
window. Yeah.
and that's, I think, the last time. And then he went to Florida, did the rampage, and maybe you can answer this. It sounds like you've read up a lot on Bundy, or is he one of the people you've written about?
No, actually, just by chance, actually, I've been listening to Anne Rule's book, "A Stranger Beside Me." So yeah, so I've been because I'm actually one of the book I'm working on right now. Actually, there's a lot of parallels I've kind of been seeing with Bundy in that. So I've been trying to hone up on Bundy a little bit more, just to see how far that goes with the person that I'm writing about right now. So yeah, so he had the second floor escape from the courthouse law library. But then he had another escape as well, where he actually got up into the ceiling, the air duct, you know, and made his way through the air duct in the ceiling up there and dropped down at a different location, and then was able to just walk out.
The sheriff says Bundy then crawled along the attic through a maze of wires and pipes and dropped down into the empty jailer's office, grabbed 2 guns, and walked out the door.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. What are your thoughts about Anne Rule, since you're boning up on that? Her theory that Ted Bundy was ultimately self-sabotaging by going to Florida, where they have the death penalty, versus where he escaped, where they did not have the death penalty.
Um, I don't know. I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. And but I guess kind of the qualifier is I don't know that Ted Bundy would actively be thinking in those terms or not. I know he ended up in Tallahassee. Um, as as Rule explained it, the reason why he ended up in Tallahassee is it reminded him of the Pacific Northwest in some respects. Um, and also it was a college town. He liked that, and he was originally kind of just planning on just blending in and enjoying not being in prison. Kind of living his life. But obviously he couldn't resist these urges he has as well. But getting back to the gist of the question, self-sabotage, I don't know that. I mean, I think Bundy would have been perfectly happy not to have been caught, and not go to the death row and get executed. I mean, I don't think he was looking to get caught. Um, yeah, that's the thing you hear sometimes is, do these guys eventually get to the point where they want to get caught? And I know some serial killers.
No, BTK, actually.
Yeah, yeah, some serial killers, some do. I think in that instance, I think it was he he craved the attention, and the the being famous. He wanted that sort of thing. So that's basically how he kind of like turned himself in, basically, so that he could kind of experience that.
If he just did nothing and just retired and led off his life, I don't know if he'd ever have been found out, because there's no reason to, even with DNA. Maybe the familial DNA could have gotten him now, but I think he would have been out there for another 20 years or something, possibly, because they just didn't have anything on him.
Yeah, but I mean, I think in his case, though, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he wanted to be caught. You know, but I don't know that we have like clear evidence that Bundy really wanted to be caught. He just got a little careless and it cost him, and that happens in a lot of these cases. I wrote about the serial killer Israel Keys, and it was a similar sort of thing. He got careless at one point. He kind of started losing control over himself and his urges, and he did something kind of stupid, and he got caught. You know, Otherwise he would have still been out there killing probably today. It just kind of happened. So
In 2012, Alaskan law enforcement came face to face with perhaps one of this country's most prolific serial killers. His name is Israel Keys. Over the next 7 months, he played a cat and mouse game with investigators, divulging clues about other victims.
Back to Rowling, the other Florida murderer on hand. What? Let's talk about that. What attracted you to his story? Number one, is he the first serial killer book that you wrote, or is he later on? And two, what attracted you?
yeah, he was not the first serial killer I wrote about. It was a little bit later on. But what attracted me to that story was, first and foremost, really was the again getting back to Bundy. Bundy was very well known. You mentioned Ted Bundy. Most people will be familiar with that name. Um,
Yes.
but Danny Rowling wasn't nearly as known, and the fact that they had these similar crimes at universities, major universities in Florida, that kind of drew me to the story. I found that very interesting. Another aspect of it that really drew me to the story was what we've been talking about earlier on was Ed Humphreys being, you know, targeted, for lack of a better word, by law enforcement as the perpetrator, and how that impacted him. I thought that was another interesting story about it as well. Um, and then just the way that Rowling went about these crimes as well. I just found that interesting too.
His story sort of took an interesting turn, right? Because one, even if he was never caught for the killings, he was sentenced to life in prison, I believe, from your book, like 4 times or something, from all the robberies, because he is such a um I'm trying to think of the right term for it, but he was somebody, shall we say, that did not seem to be open to changing his ways. And with all the previous priors or whatever, his sentences were like maxed out.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he served all these years in prison prior to, the murders. And then, of course, he got caught for the murders and then ended up pleading guilty on, literally on the eve of trial, during the jury selection. He stunned everybody and, decided he was going to, confess to the crimes, admit it, and plea to them.
That's what I wanted to talk to you about, because I was leading into it, the mentality of Ted Bundy and Ann Rule, because he pled guilty with no deal, it looks like.
Yeah, I think it's hard to explain like why he decided he wanted to do that. I do know in prison, he seemed to again he claimed, it's hard to judge this how authentic these sort of things are, but he claimed in prison to really start to feel um remorse for what he had done, feel bad for what he had done. And he wanted to not have to put the family members through, a whole trial, having to relive, all the bad things that had happened to their loved ones, as part of the reason why he did that. Whether that's accurate or not, who knows? But that was the claim anyway. And he did get the death penalty. He was sentenced to death, and
Right. So, I mean, that would actually support his claim if he pled guilty with nothing on the table and was sentenced to death. That would seem to imply that maybe he was being truthful about wanting to take responsibility, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, it could be. It very well could be. But he he did by confessing to those, he did kind of gain something. I've talked to people that got life sentences for their crimes, who have told me, that if they knew back, decades before when they decided to plea to get the life sentence instead of death penalty, if they'd known, how it would be over that period of time, spending their whole life in prison, they would have preferred to have just taken the death sentence, you know? So I don't know if maybe that was part of what was in his mind too, maybe. Who knows?
That's interesting. So, can we visit that for a second? You visited people who are in prison for life? Are these people you're writing about, or how are you running across them? I believe you're a lawyer, so I don't know.
Yeah,
You're
so
representing
well, for instance, the book I'm working on right now, the serial killer that the book is about, I'm in active communication with him. I've been speaking with him for, I don't know, 6 or 7 months or something now, but and he flat out told me that, he knew if he basically if he could do it all over again, so to speak, he would just would have taken the death penalty. Um, and the interesting thing was he was talking about that too in the context of talking about um, another guy, another serial offender, who he knows that he met him in prison for a brief period of time. Who's another guy that I actually communicate with and have been doing so for years and years. Um, and this other person is currently facing murder charges on another case. He's in prison, but he's also facing murder charges on another case. And um, so the comment was, kind of like he should just take the death penalty. He should just take it, instead of fighting it and everything. Um, so it's just kind of interesting hearing that, from someone's perspective who's spent so much time in prison and did all these bad things obviously before that to get there, but kind of looking back on their life and kind of their quality of life, you know, because most of the time you think about it, a lot of these people that are accused of these things and they're facing the death penalty, it's natural human instinct, I think, to want to preserve one's life, right? And so you don't want to get the death sentence, right? The life in prison seems much more appealing. It seems a lot better. But I guess
well,
that's
look at the Menendez brothers. It also gives possibilities down the road.
yeah,
I'm
yeah, true.
But I hate to say, but Menendez brothers, they may be getting out. It's very real chance of that.
Yeah, they could be.
So
I
I don't
mean,
know.
the winds change, and um, the way our culture is now, there's a different perspective on what they did, obviously, by a lot of people. And so, yeah, so like, as you said, maybe they'll get out. I mean, there's that chance. Once you're dead, you're dead. But if you're serving a life sentence, you could maybe eventually get out. So that has to be weighed as well. But I just found it interesting to hear the perspective of someone that had been kind of through all that sort of thing.
Well, do you mind if I hijack this and talk mechanics with you? Because I think a lot of people want to know, like, first off, how do you um, get introduced to a serial killer? How do you establish a relationship? And I'll ask you more questions on that. But first off, it's like, do you write a letter or something and say, hey, I would like to write this book, and it's obviously involving you. How does this work?
Yeah, that's actually you hit the nail right on the head there, so to speak. It's coming across a story, wherever it may be, about something they've done, and then I start reading about them, and then if it's a story that interests me for whatever reasons, then yeah, I'll reach out to them um and introduce myself and say this is what I'm looking to do, um and the interesting thing is that some of these guys know each other. They meet each other over time, and they talk about you to each other, and they say basically they kind of endorse you, for lack of a better word, I guess, to each other. And so you kind of get um you get sort of an in that way too, I guess. If one of them knows you and hasn't had a bad experience with you, then they let somebody else know that, and then that person's more receptive to talking to you. Maybe they want to be with somebody just straight out of off the street, so to speak. So that's how it's happened in several instances. um I also had somebody reach out to me after watching a true crime show on TV in the prison that I was, interviewed on and appeared in. They reached out to me after that. So there's different ways, I suppose.
I was it's a peculiar hobby. Can we reach back? Like, who was the first person, if you don't mind revealing, like, who was the first person you reached out to, and what inspired you to say, you know what, I'd like to talk to this particular person, and do this book.
Well, these are all serial killers. And what really what caused me to reach out to them is just the underlying fascination I have with people who do this, and wanting to know why they do it. Getting back to the Idaho case, like, why did the guy do that? What would cause him to do that? Like, why were these people killed? Were they targeted specifically? Were they just wrong place, wrong time kind of thing? Um, and then, what drives somebody to do this? So to me, it's just I've always had this fascination with kind of this darker side of people, and why they do these sorts of things. And so just kind of wanting to get to know how that happens, and getting wanting to get to know the person who actually does it, um, just to try to get a better sense of it, instead of just hearing, reports about it, and, different people talking about them or things like that. Actually kind of go straight to the source, and, hear about their perspective on things. And, um, but
What have you
the
found?
tricky thing with that, of course, is remembering who you're dealing with, because
And
there's a little bit of a tendency to get sort of friendly with people when you've, been talking with them for months or years. So you also have to kind of stay cognizant of who they are and what they've done, and kind of what their personality might be, and things like that. So, um, but I've always had this fascination with kind of the psychological side of these crimes and wanting to know that sort of stuff.
Well, now that you've done it, I mean, what have you found from talking to them? Because like you just said, I think it's very valid. I would be worried that I'd be talking to one of the top manipulators around. So somebody who tell me anything and everything, and by the way, it would have has no limit. I mean, literally, they will kill. So there's no governor, nothing in place to bring them down. So what have you found, and what are your thoughts? I mean, what did you expect, I guess I could say, and what did you find out?
Well, I guess I'll answer that partly with saying stay tuned. That's inherent in the book I'm working on now. That's going to be a part of that, um, sort of that experience, and in dealing with the different facets of this person. But um, so
Are you a character in the book now? I mean, I'm saying, is it like a travelogue of madness to where you're putting yourself in the story and saying, this is how I feel, think, and do, or are you
I haven't
removed?
I have not started writing the story per se yet. I'm still in the
Mhm.
research. I'm still in the kind of gathering everything together. So I haven't actually started putting pen to paper on that yet. So it's still kind of up in my head how I'm going to go about doing that. But I do want to convey that experience somehow, whether it be interjecting in the story or not. I haven't decided yet. I don't know the best way to go about doing it, um, but I do want to have that in there in some way.
All right. Well, speaking about writing about the stories or whatever, can you tell me about Sandra London?
Sandra, she was one of those, what do they call them? Like serial killer sort of groupie sort of person.
Miss London and myself have been corresponding for almost a year now. Regardless of what Williams has said, Miss London is of the highest caliber, sincere and honest, a woman of extraordinary talents.
How did she come up in this case, and how was she part of the story?
Well, I mean, she had a past experiences with incarcerated individuals and specifically another serial killer. Um, she had forged a relationship with prior to Rowling. And then I'm trying to remember exactly how she first got in contact with Rowling. I can't remember off the top of my head, but somehow it may have been like what I was alluding
Wasn't
to.
it
It may have been,
another prisoner?
yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. It may have been what I was alluding to with the individuals I've been talking to, where one knows the other, and they kind of, you know, endorse you. So yeah, I think that's sort of what happened with her is that the one knew the other, kind of endorsed her, so to speak, or put them in contact somehow. Um, and then she's
Wasn't there an arrangement with her and another prisoner that you wrote about that they would be splitting the profits or the proceeds of his story if she got it?
yeah, there was. I don't remember all the details of that.
Okay.
Just, I wrote this book years ago, so I don't remember like all the little
No
details
problem.
of it, but yeah, there was something along those lines. And and she may have tried to do the same thing with Rowling. I'm trying to remember. 'Cause they did collaborate and release a book as you mentioned earlier. Um, how to the making of a serial killer, I think it was called something like that. Um, but she ended up having a romantic relationship with Rowling. And they exchanged a lot of love letters and had visitations and all that sort of thing. So there seemed to be genuine feelings there between the two of them. And Rowling even like he serenaded her in court one time. I remember, and things like that. So they definitely had a very personal romantic relationship together.
Wow. So now, overall, What are your feelings about the Danny Rowling and his case? You mentioned Israel Keys, so these are all individuals, even though they collectively have done a similar thing. But walking away from the Danny Rowling story, how did that leave you?
I mean, there was a lot of dark material, obviously, in the story. So, you know, when I completed that book, I had downtime after that. I often do. Typically, I don't jump straight from one story into another. Typically, I kind of take some time and kind of recharge, I guess would be the way to put it. But um, these stories, they tend to exact a little bit of a toll when you're working on them and writing about them, just because of the subject matter and the horrific things that these people do. Um, it impacts you. I mean, I think it's hard for it not to. So, specifically with the rolling story too, I had to take some time to kind of get away from it and let the kind of darkness dissipate to some extent before I, tried to start working on anything else.
Okay, now I always like to wrap up with one overarching question, if you will. And I don't even know which way it'll go here, but the question is essentially, what is the one question that I should have asked you and I did not? Or as an alternative, what is one question that you've been waiting to be asked, but no one ever has?
Maybe how I went about writing the rolling book, perhaps.
Sounds great.
Um, that's what leaps into my head right now.
So how did you go about it?
So the story, once I decided I was going to write it, I started, you know, the first kind of general step is getting all the newspaper sort of coverage I can in reading about it and getting, a good overview of the case. And then going from there, of course, trying to get more direct source materials, things like court documents and, witness statements and, police files and these sorts of things. And then, also trying to talk to people, obviously. But so, yeah, so eventually, as it turned out, I reached out to the police departments, of course, and, they all redirect me to the state attorney's office there in, uh, in the Gainesville area. And so I contacted the state attorney's office over there, and as it turned out, it was pretty good timing because they were actually in the process of getting ready to destroy the file. Because they
Ah,
can only they can only keep so many files, obviously, right? So, but they're like, You're welcome to come look at it, before we do." So I was like, "Oh yeah." So I basically jumped in my car and drove over there, and they took me to this offsite storage facility and took me back in there, and there was, obviously there's these um rows and rows and rows of these metal um shelving um things, whatever you call them. But and they were, I don't know, about, I think, about 4 rows high on each one. But the rolling case was pretty big, so it was multiple rows of these things, with, the 4 shelves or whatever it was on each of them. So boxes and boxes of stuff. So I went over there and I spent a ton of time going through all that stuff and, took a lot of pictures of things in the file and took a lot of notes, obviously, and all that. Um, and so I was pretty lucky in that sense to be able to get that stuff before it got destroyed. So
so you were allowed to scan it or whatever, like if you had a portable scanner or something
yeah, I mean, I had
to
my
directly
phone, so I could take pictures of everything. So I took, tons of pictures
Okay.
of documents and things, and then I could print them out later, as needed and things. So, um, and that was like kind of a treasure trove of information, um, for the case. Most everything I needed was in there. Um,
That's awesome.
I did
That's
read,
awesome.
the London book that she did with Rowling. I read that. And all the other sources I could find out there as well. Tried to speak to whoever I could find. I never reached out to any of the victims' families, just because from what I had gathered by reading about things, none of them seemed very much wanting to talk about it and relive it and stuff. So, kind of out of respect for that, I never even contacted them. I didn't want to like dredge up, the bad memories or anything like that.
No, it makes sense. It can cause them harm. Actually, I've got one more question because I'm cheating, but it goes back to you're talking to convicted felons right now, and how do you go about that? Do you just have a random phone calls? Do they call you? Do you go visit them in person? How do you keep up a line of communication with them while you're doing all this?
Well, it depends on the institution they're in and kind of what the policy is for that institution. But for example, the guy that I'm writing a book about, or I'm going to be writing this book about right now, he gets free phone calls where he's at, so he can call me. It's kind of a hassle because he's limited to like 15-minute increments. So you speak for 15 minutes and then you're disconnected and you got to call back, and start up again. But he can call me, certain time periods during the day. So we also are able to communicate via messaging. So kind of almost like an email sort of system. So basically, just kind of set up times to talk. Like I'll say, how about 9 o'clock on Wednesday, and then he'll call me at 9 o'clock on Wednesday, and typically we'll talk for a few hours each time we do it. So, um, and I keep, and then I keep notes, obviously the calls and stuff. So I've got, I've amassed a pretty good transcript of those calls and things. So obviously I'll go back and use that when I go to write.
Now, as a tease for maybe the future, can you reveal who this is, or what they did?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to be secretive, but I'm gonna kind of keep it under wraps for right now, just because I don't want to like kind of stir the pot with anybody. But um, it's a serial killer, um, back from sort of kind of the same time period Bundy was active, actually.
70s. Wow.
Yeah. So it's and he had a lot of victims, and um yeah, I guess that's about all I'll say, I guess, for now. But I think people will be really interested in the story once I actually am able to get going on it.
Well, I mean, you really narrowed it down because of that time period. I'm sure an aficionado or aficionado could probably figure it out. I don't know them well enough. I mean, Ed Kemper pumps into my head, but I don't know if that would be him.
It was kind of the golden age of serial killers, I guess, the 70s and 80s.
Well, yeah, that's true.
So
That's true. All right. Well, JT, I hope you're up for maybe coming back if you want to talk about, upcoming book or Israel Keys or something else you've done. I'd love to talk to you again.
yeah, for sure. Anytime, man. I appreciate it.